Hi, and welcome to Super Insider, the podcast where we talk to you about all things to do with your super to make sure that you are making the most of it. My name is Josh Van Gestel. I am the Senior Manager of Education at Australian Retirement Trust, and I am sitting in for Anne Fuchs, our regular host. To assist me in today's podcast, I'm joined by Ruth Weaver, one of our wonderful education gurus. Hi, Ruth. How are you?
I'm really well, Josh. It's lovely to be here.
And today, Ruth and I are going to talk to you about really how you can awaken your super and make sure that you're taking the small steps that can have a huge difference down the track. Before we start though, I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we all come today. I pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their strong connection to the lands in which we work, live, and the community connections that they have. I would like to also acknowledge that today's podcast is of a general advice nature only, so really encourage you to consider whether it is right for you. Now, as I said, I'm joined today by Ruth, and what we're going to do is talk about 6 steps to awaken your super. And the reason why we're using that terminology is that many of us are often oblivious to our super and the size of it. Research actually tells us that over half of Australians aren't actively engaged with their super, and that more still are unsure how much they may need to fund their retirement. But Ruth, we often talk about a lot of people really don't know the potential of their super. They don't even know how much they've got in their super. But we also often say that super is going to be one of the largest pools of money that many people will often have. How do you actually talk to people about their super and just starting to think about it?
I think one of the issues we have with superannuation, particularly when we're young, is the fact that it's a future problem. And if you think about a young person considering their superannuation, it's almost like visualizing something in the far distance. And when you've got distance, it will look quite small. And as it's getting closer to you, this thing starts to appear bigger and gains momentum. So I often say your superannuation is almost like a slow-moving beast that's approaching you as you're getting to retirement. And it is important that we are thinking about it a bit more often.
And I think even with that analogy that the future is probably where we look at our super. We don't think about the tangibility of it now. But if we think about your super, the average member at Australian Retirement Trust has a balance of about $123,000. If I put $123,000 on the table in front of you now, would you actually ignore it?
I would not.
No?
And I can tell you one thing, that's a lot more money that is currently sitting in my bank account right now as well. So I certainly would not be ignoring it.
And I think that's really what we've got to talk about today, that even though for some of our listeners, the super might feel a long way off, I think it's about how you actually make a connection with it today.
That's right.
Thinking about that connection, what is the first thing that you should really think about in sizing up your super and starting to have a conversation about it?
Look, the first step is the easiest step, but it's also the most important because if you don't take this first step, you're going to find it really difficult to implement any other steps. And that is simply to connect with your account. And most of us today will connect with our accounts digitally. We've all digitally connected with our bank accounts. We're all on the apps and we can log in at any moment to look at our bank balance. And we should be able to do the same with our superannuation balance.
I think about all the apps I have on my phone and thinking about my super app. It's probably one of the ones I very often go into. It's a really great way to just start to see what your super's doing. And it's actually a really easy process to just set up the app and connect in the first place, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Look, and it's the same as if you're downloading your banking app. There's no extra steps involved. So we do need to be looking at this as the same way we would look at our bank balance, for example, because it is our money.
But how do you then start bringing it to life? You've got the app, you look at the amount that's in there, where it might mean something to you, it may not. How do you start actually giving that amount meaning.
Look, it's hard to get context on your super balance. And that's because we don't talk very much about money openly. We've all grown up being told it's a bit taboo, we're rude even to talk about money. And that's part of the problem. We don't know what other people have in their superannuation balances. And it's very hard to then have context whether you're doing well or whether you're not doing well. So I think it's really important that we're talking a bit more openly and frankly about our superannuation and retirement savings. I often encourage people, particularly young people, to find themselves a super buddy. I myself have a super buddy, and it's somebody that's around the same age, potentially earning a similar income, and just checking in with each other on a regular basis as to how your balance is growing. And what it does is it highlights red flags. If one of you is lagging behind the other, it might highlight some issues or some areas of your superannuation that might need attention. So just having a bit better context around how your peers are also doing is really important.
I love the whole concept of a super buddy. I've actually got a twin brother, as you know. He's probably the perfect super buddy. But I think the other thing is also if people want to have some external touch points, there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of tools to compare really how much you should have based on your age and gender, for example, and even on the Australian Retirement Trust website. So that could in itself even be a good way to start thinking about how much you might need. But before we take action on our super, you often talk about the need to do a bit of housekeeping, a bit of admin.
Yeah, there's a really important step that we can sometimes overlook, and historically it was a difficult step. That's not the case anymore. And that is considering bringing your superannuation together. Now, we are getting better at this as Australians because the process to consolidate our superannuation is so much easier today. And there's lots of ways you can do it by logging into your accounts online. Most funds will give you the capability to do it through your online portals, but also through your MyGov account as well. You'll be able to bring that superannuation together if you want.
Why is it important, though? You've got this mishmash of super funds potentially. Why is it important to think about bringing it together?
Look, it's important to think about bringing it together because if you have two accounts, for example, you are paying two sets of administration fees. And the silent killer can also often be the insurances. And many of us will have insurances on our accounts that we weren't aware of. And you would be paying for that as well. And it's important to remind the audience as well, it's okay to have two super funds. It's not the worst thing in the world. But you need to be able to articulate why you've chosen to have two. And that might be for insurance reasons or investment reasons. But if you're not really able to explain why, or you don't have a strategic reason for holding more than one account, you probably don't need to have more than one account. And
it's probably for that reason it's important before you do think about combining super funds, maybe just think about what's going to happen with things like insurances that you might have. But okay, you've started a discussion with your super buddy. You've looked at comparisons online. You've done a bit of that housekeeping and tidying up. And now you're starting to notice that, like you were saying, there might be some red flags. My super isn't quite where I want it to be or where the comparisons say it should be. Probably the first thing you can think about is choosing your own super style, we call it. Thinking about your investments. Why is that an important part of the super discussion?
It's an important part because the investment performances that your fund is generating for you will depend very much on which particular investment option you're in. And it plays a significant role in determining what your balance might be able to get to by the time you retire. So thinking about how comfortable you are with your money exposed to different types of assets like shares, for example, or property is a really important part of determining what happens to your money. You talked about the $123,000 sitting at the table. And I would say if you saw that and somebody said, hey, we'll go and invest that for you, I think most of us would be pretty keen to know where exactly that's going. And your super should be no different.
It's a beautiful opportunity with super you have with almost no other investment, that it is a very long-term investment. Some of us might have our super for 60 or 70 years or more. That gives a lot of opportunity around thinking about how you invest and the length of that investment, but also the compounding effects that it achieves. When you talk to people, though, about their comfort with investments or how they should think about investments, if they don't know where to start, what do you often suggest to them?
Well, look, the obvious call to action here would be to talk to your own super fund.
Yep.
And they will want to know things like your age, your existing balance, but also your own innate risk tolerance. So by nature, we're all very different. We all see risk in a different way, and it will depend on personal factors like your age and your balance, for example, and how important that super asset will be to fund your retirement. In my own household, I have no problems taking risk. I sort of have an appetite for it. But my husband is the polar opposite to me. So we are the same age. We've got similar superannuation balances, and yet we're very different innately in how we look at risk and how we want to invest our super.
And I think it's also important that in talking to your super fund, a lot of super funds actually have tools to help you identify how you might feel about investments or what sort of investor you are. Australian Retirement Trust has one of those. And if it comes to actually wanting to make an investment change, it's actually not that scary a process, is it?
Yeah, people really overthink this.
Yeah.
You know, I've got to switch my investment portfolio. How long does it take? Or what are the rules around it? Look, everyone in Australia can determine how their superannuation is invested within the menu that's on offer to them. We're no different. So our members can, pick their own investment portfolios through the mobile app or through their accounts online.
I think in my own case, I think I've made 3 or 4 investment changes with my super over the last 30 years or so. So there is power in actually making some big steps with your investment decisions as well, isn't there?
And trusting the purpose of the investment option you've chosen. And these investment options within super, they're not designed to be erratic and short term. They are designed to be long term, because that's what super is. It's a very long term asset, and the portfolios are built to respect that.
So thinking about that, a key part of that is by actually feeding your super. Contributions, it's probably the most confusing part, putting money into super. Without getting into the detail of it though, why are contributions important? You've got your employer putting in like 11.5% into your super, or going up to 12%. Why should a person think about putting more in themselves?
Because of the compounding effect it has, really. And what I will say, though, is if someone is beginning their journey of engaging with their super, I wouldn't be too stressed about the contributions until you've ticked all of your other boxes. So be comfortable with the environment first, understand the environment you're investing in. And once you start to fall in love with it and trust the process of super, you'll be naturally wired to want to invest in super. It's a very tax-effective way to invest money. You can choose to invest before tax, where in a lot of cases you would catch a 15% tax, which is a lot more friendly than the tax bracket most of us are paying. So that's one option of getting it in before tax. The other option is getting it in after tax. You'll have different benefits for different peoples depending on your income and the stage of life you're at, on how you feed it. But you're feeding it because you want to benefit, number one, from the tax effectiveness, but number two, because of the compounding effect every single dollar will have once it lands in there. And it's really important with compounding as well to remember that in the short term, you might actually experience ups and downs with your balance, but over the long term, it's incredibly powerful.
And it's important to think about there's different incentives the government also gives for, if you put money in pre-tax into super, there's a tax advantage there the government gives you. If you put it in post-tax, depending on your circumstance, the government might help put in a co-contribution. But even as you get older, the ability to downsize your home and put proceeds from that in super as well. So I think I often look at super as when you're young, you can afford to take small, irregular steps. As you get older and more focused on your super, maybe those steps that you take, particularly around contributions, need to be a bit bigger, maybe a bit more regular and a bit bolder. Would you agree with that?
I do, because the problem is, or the benefit you have when you're young is time. So time is actually your greatest resource with superannuation where you're young. So you only have to put a small bit in and time does the work. As you're getting older, you've lost the benefit of time. So you've got to compensate with extra money going through. So you do need to strike strike a balance there with taking advantage of the compounding effect.
Super also has this really important insurance component. So you talked earlier about insurance being a silent killer.
Yep.
What do you mean, and what should a person think about when it comes to their insurance in super?
It can be a silent killer because it's an extra cost associated with our superannuation balance, and whereby you didn't need it or didn't know you had it. That's where the damage can be done. But in the exact same breath, it's also a really important component of our superannuation accounts. Things go wrong in life, and I know where you've got households where budgeting is restrictive, and we're all trying to manage this cost of living. Insurances is often the very first thing to go, and I think it's comforting for people to know that holding insurance in your superannuation is a way that doesn't necessarily impact your immediate cash flow. So it does give protection to you and the family through a channel that's not directly impacting your bank account balance on a week-to-week basis. So it's a really important component of superannuation, but you do need to keep an eye on it because it isn't there for free. It is a cost that's associated with the account, and making sure you're striking a balance between being protected and having the right insurance for you, but also being mindful of the impact that those costs can have on your growth of your balance.
And that is the important balance, that yes, super is there to fund your retirement, but it's also there to protect your present if something means you're not going to get to retirement.
That's right.
And I do think we talk about ignoring your super, ignoring your insurance, and ignoring that protection. You don't think about it until you need it.
Until you need it, that's right.
Yeah. So, well, there's a lot that we've talked about, but probably the key thing to then think about, and I go back right to my opening where I talked about this being general advice, is how can people start to explore this further? How do people start going, well, actually, I want to be more informed, or I want to understand this more? What are the steps that we really encourage them to take?
Look, you really need to be reaching out and getting advice. Superannuation can seem very overwhelming and complicated where you've not engaged with it before, and you need to take the first step. And I understand it's overwhelming and it's intimidating for many people to take that step.
A lot of people will ignore it because of that. Yeah.
And I think the issue we have is our financial literacy around super is quite low, and it serves as a real barrier to us. And we need to be reaching out and talking to our super funds more openly and more honestly. So reaching out and getting guidance and advice, the reason you need to do that is because there are wonderful opportunities in superannuation. We spoke about some of them, particularly around investments and contributions. But there's also pitfalls. And what the advice does is it highlights the opportunities so you can take advantage of them. But it also waves the red flag around those pitfalls so you can avoid them. It's so important that people are reaching out and seeking that advice and guidance.
And I think when you, again, using that analogy of the slow-moving beast, super is a long way off in the distance for a lot of people, but that also means it's got this enormous potential. It really has this incredible potential that I think for most people is unrealised because they're not seeking out that guidance or advice just to assist them to know what small steps can I take to really unleash that potential. If we think about pulling that all together, we've talked about our 6 steps to really awaken your super, to bring that future potential to life today. Think about sizing yours up, that super buddy, and how does it compare? Clean up that mishmash of super funds where you don't have the need to have more than one. And think about your super style. How should you invest and what's right for you? But also, how do you feed your super to make sure that it grows and takes advantage of that compounding effect Ruth talked about? Remember to take cover. Your super isn't just there to grow your wealth into the future, it's to protect your present. And lastly, but most importantly, remember to also unleash the potential of your super by seeking out guidance, advice, and asking questions about the actions that you should take today to improve your future tomorrow. So, Ruth, thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom. I've certainly learned some things from it, and I'll be finding out what my twin brother's got.
Yes,
in his
you need to
super
talk
now.
to your super buddy. You need to get a race and celebrate those milestones. That's what I do. We like to celebrate those big milestones when we reach a particular balance and we set those goals for ourselves. It's a wonderful way to keep yourself connected.
I think that's fabulous. Well, have a wonderful day, and thank you everyone for joining us.